We share these streets, true tales of everyday folk in bygone Nottingham. Episode 15. The Pearsons. In 1939, in a field in Beeston, a crowd of people laughed and cheered at the sight of two opposing teams riding donkeys, swinging mallets, and chasing a ball around a pitch. This bizarre spectacle was donkey polo, and although it never really caught on as a pastime, it brought a great deal of fun and laughs to the crowd that day, despite the threat of war that loomed over life in Britain. The field was around what we now know as Dovecote Lane Recreation Ground. One of the donkey polo teams represented Reynolds Foundry, and the other the Beeston Boiler Company. The latter had existed for almost 50 years at that point, and it had been central to the lives of many people in Beeston. In this episode we're going to look into the history of the Beeston Boiler Company, but more importantly the father and son at the heart of it, Henry and Noel, and their family. Henry was born on the 29th of August 1850 in Chilwell. The Pearson family was well established in the area at that time. It's believed they'd lived around Chilwell and Attenborough since at least the mid-1600s. Henry had a keen interest in wildlife and nature, especially birds. Henry's father John was a successful businessman. In 1841 he had formed the company Foster and Pearson, along with fellow Beestonian Robert Foster. They designed and constructed glass houses, which were used by botanists and horticulturalists. Foster and Pearson were incredibly successful. Queen Victoria had their glass houses at Windsor and Osborne House, as did the Duke of Bedford at Woburn Abbey and the Duke of Devonshire at Chatsworth. Closer to home, a structure was commissioned for Lord Middleton's estate at Woollerton Hall. Their buildings were exported to South America, Africa, Belgium, Holland, Italy, Germany, Hong Kong and Sydney. As well as the buildings themselves, Foster and Pearson also supplied equipment to heat the buildings and maintain the optimum temperatures for growing plants, flowers, vegetables, fruit and trees. In 1885 Henry was living at Elm Cottage, Beeston. He was married to a woman named Laura. A definite location for Elm Cottage has been hard to find, but we do know it was close to the junction of High Road, Broadgate and Humber Road. Noel Jervis Pearson was born at Elm Cottage, the fifth of Henry and Laura's 7 children. The success of Foster and Pearson had made the Pearsons a well-off family, and gave them the means to pursue other ventures when opportunities arose. By 1891 the family lived at the White House on Town Street in Bramcote. It was a large house and they had a governess named Alice Treffry and 3 servants, cook Harriet Ward, 23, housemaid Sarah Shortland, 17, and nurse Fanny Moore, 24. In the census that year, Henry was described as a horticultural engineer, but outside of this he had also been pursuing his ornithological interest with zeal. In 1893 he went on an expedition to northern Norway and acquired eggs from 47 different bird species. Taking wild bird eggs was made illegal in 1954, as it has serious implications for conservation. But at the time it was considered a scientific and progressive activity. In April 1893, Henry and his older brother Lewis formed the Beeston Foundry Company Limited, with a registered address of Mona Street, off Queen's Road in Beeston. Never one to sit still for long though, Henry was off again quite soon after. In 1894 he and his brother Charles travelled to southern Iceland making field notes on birds, notably the nesting habits of harlequin ducks. Their findings in this and their Norway visit were published in the Ibis, the peer-reviewed scientific journal of the British Ornithologists' Union. Henry continued to juggle his business interests with such expeditions, and later visited Russian Lapland and Russia itself. More articles in the Ibis followed, along with books giving more detailed accounts of his expeditions. By 1896 the Beeston Foundry Company had occupied a 28-acre site centred around the Mona Street building and adjacent to the Midland Railway Company's line. A map of the time shows the foundry itself as a building of about 3,700 square feet next to the railway line. Noel had previously studied engineering at Nottingham University College and trained at Messrs. Reeder's Works in Nottingham, but in October 1905 began 14 months of engineering training in the USA. He returned in 1907 and began working at the Beeston Foundry Company. By 1909 he was a director. There was a census in 1911, and Henry, Noel, and Noel's brother Stephen Hetley Pearson, who went by Hetley, were all listed as Directors of Engineering Limited Company. The company flourished, and 1912 saw adverts appearing in national newspapers for the Robin Hood range of boilers and Beeston radiators. On February 8, 1913, Henry passed away in Asyut, Egypt, aged 63. 1914 was a year of unprecedented global disruption and worry, but even then a positive could be found. Noel married Kathleen Nicholls, born in Nipton, Leicestershire, who hailed from a wealthy military family. One of Kathleen's grandfathers had been Commander of the Royal Navy, and the other a Major in the Indian Army. As a complicated web of diplomatic agreements and alliances dragged the world to war, Noel and his two twin brothers, Hetley and John, enlisted into the army. Lewis Pearson, Noel's uncle, took on an important project during World War I, when the company assisted with the production of munitions. This work would earn him the title of Commander of the Order of the British Empire, a CBE, in 1919. Noel enlisted in the Sherwood Foresters' 9th Battalion. He quickly rose through the ranks and became a Lance Sergeant. He was later discharged for a commission to the 12th Battalion. The 12th Battalion of the Sherwood Foresters have a unique place in World War I history. In 1916 they began publishing a satirical magazine called the Wipers Times, which they distributed to other soldiers in the trenches. The magazine made fun of the situation on the front, often indirectly through spoof adverts. One advert was for the Dead Cow Farm Cinema, which in May 1916 was apparently showing Over the Top, a screaming farce, and The Empty Jar, a rum tragedy. The name Wipers Times was a reference to the way many British soldiers pronounced Ypres, where they were stationed in Belgium. The magazine was published on a printing press found in an abandoned building by the Sherwood Foresters. Many of the soldiers involved in producing the magazine went by humorous pseudonyms, and so their real names are unrecorded. There was a Pearson involved, Lieutenant Jack Pearson, who was credited as sub-editor, but he wasn't related to Noel. In 1916, Noel was awarded the Military Cross in George V's birthday honours, and in April 1918 the Distinguished Service Order. It would be wrong to present the First World War as nothing but an adventure for the Pearsons, though. On November 4th, 1918, Noel's brother John, a corporal in the 2nd New Zealand Machine Gun Section, died of malaria whilst on active service in Egypt. On December 1st, 1917, Noel's brother Hetley was killed in action in Bois-de-Gauche, France. Throughout his life, Hetley had been enthusiastically involved in Beeston Boys' Brigade. This was a popular pastime, and there were many companies around Nottingham. The Beeston Company had been formed in 1895, but ceased operations in 1905. However, it was resurrected by Noel's brother Hettley in 1909. Hettley, John and Noel had all joined BB in its original incarnation in 1897, and clearly it had made a lasting impression on them. A booklet produced by Beeston's Boys Brigade in 1999 describes the 1909 rebirth under Hettley's captaincy as a new era for the BB and district. The Nottingham Daily Express, December 8, 1917, featured the following emotive article. Beeston Boys Brigade loses its best friend, an appreciation. Beeston has been plunged into mourning by the news received yesterday by the Reverend H.W. Gooch, acting captain of the Beeston Company of the Boys Brigade, from the chaplain of the Grenadier Guards at the front, that Lieutenant S. Hettley Pearson has been killed while leading his men in action. It is not much to say that Mr. Hettley, as he was affectionately known at Beeston, has left behind an imperishable name, engraved not on bricks and stones but in the hearts of the lads he laboured amongst with such enthusiastic zeal, and in his example of splendid manhood will live as long as the Boys Brigade with which he was so prominently identified endures. He was the big brother of every boy in his company, and in season and out of season he set his lofty ambition before him, to lead the lads entrusted to his care to fear God and to follow the path of duty regardless of the consequences. He was a pioneer and an adventurer in the best sense of the word. Long before the governments thought it worthwhile to set up advisory boards to deal with the problem of the boy — we realise there is a boy problem nowadays — Mr. Hettley dedicated his life to this work. Beginning in a humble way at the old Anglo-Scotian mills premises, he modelled on the methods which Mr. Oliver Hine had adopted with such striking success at Dakin Street, and 5 years ago, and thanks to his inspiring initiative, a handsome suite of buildings costing between £3,000 and £4,000 were erected in one of Beeston's main thoroughfares as a permanent home for his company, which by that time had grown to be the second largest in the county, a position it retained until later years. Later, a spacious recreation ground adjacent to the rugby enclosure was acquired for outdoor sports, more recently a splendid gymnasium attached to the headquarters. In August 1914 came the great test, and the way Mr. Hettley's lads responded to the call is eloquent of the spirit and self-sacrifice which had been learned first in the Bible class, then in the drill hall, and finally on the blood-stained battlefields in different parts of the world. Every member of the band and football team joined up in the first month, and out of 200 old boys of military age there were not more than a score out of Calke. It was a sad and yet a proud day for Beeston when the news first came that the 3 brave lads had died valiantly at Gallipoli, and since then the roll of honour has been steadily lengthening. Captain Hettley Pearson is the 29th to make the great sacrifice, and there are still 157 of his old boys fighting with the colours, whilst there are 3 in hospital. Before joining up, Captain Pearson took the precaution of having deeds drawn up, placing the control of the institute in the hands of trustees, with a committee of managers and an endowment of £10,000, in order to ensure the continuance of the work on definite lines he himself laid down. Another of his local activities was the secretaryship of the Beeston Orphanage. Lieutenant Pearson joined the forces about 18 months ago, but it was not until he transferred to the Guards some 6 months that he went to the front. Unmarried, he was the son of the late Henry Pearson, founder of the Beeston Foundry Company, and a nephew of Mr. Lewis Pearson. It was 7 years before Hettley's body was found. The Imperial War Graves Commission was able to identify the body as his by means of the officer garb and a handkerchief embroidered with his initials. When the Great War ended in 1918, the fortunes of the Pearson family were restored along with the peace. In 1920, Noel and Kathleen had a son, Henry. 4 years later, Henry had twin siblings in Basil and Mark. The company changed its name to the Beeston Boiler Company Limited in 1923. As well as being a successful businessman, Noel was a community-minded individual and very active around Beeston and Nottingham. He was an enthusiastic supporter of both the Nottingham Children's Hospital, which he served as president in 1928, and Nottingham General Hospital. He He was president of the latter in 1930 and 31. The Children's Hospital had been opened in 1869 and was the brainchild of Mary Melicent Hine, the daughter of Nottingham-based architect T.C. Hine. In an age before the NHS, it was a groundbreaking idea, a free hospital specifically for children from poor homes. A declaration of poverty had to be signed by the family and countersigned by a clergyman known to them. It was open to poor folk from anywhere, and there were no geographical criteria. Perhaps because of his time in the army, Noel had a fondness for structured organisations such as the Scouts and Girls and Boys Brigades. He was on the committee of Nottingham Association of Boy Scouts in 1929 and president of Beeston Boys Brigade in the same year. No doubt Noel considered this was a touching way of honouring his late brother Hettley. In 1931 he was president of the Beeston branch of the British Legion and had the same role at the Wollerton branch in 1933. In August 1930, 2 Robin Hood boilers were installed to provide horticultural heating in the large gardens at Calke Abbey in Derbyshire. The boilers provided heat to the mushroom house, the vinery and the cucumber houses. Prestigious commissions like this were great advertisements for the Beeston Boiler Company. The boiler remains on public view at Calke Abbey, which is now managed by the National Trust. Noel seemed skilled at balancing the many commitments in his life. Among the large number already listed, he also spent time as the Vice Chair of Southwell Diocesan Finance Board and helped unemployed people as part of a local unemployment committee. At a Privy Council ceremony at Buckingham Palace in 1935, Noel was chosen by King George V to become the High Sheriff of Nottingham. It seems even this role was becoming something of a Pearson family business, as Noel succeeded his uncle Lewis as High Sheriff. In 1938, Laura Kate Pearson, Noel's mum, passed away. She lived in Kent and was in her 80s at the time of passing. In 1939 the world was plunged into war again. All 3 of Noel and Kathleen's sons, Henry and twins Basil and Mark, served in World War II. Sadly, only Mark came home. The donkey polo match we described at the start was one part of the annual Beeston Carnival at the time, a 4-day social event and horticultural show held jointly by several Beeston companies to raise money for voluntary hospitals. Some employers in those days took a great interest in their employees' lives beyond the offices, warehouses, factories and foundries. The Beeston Boiler Co. also presented commemorative watches to employees when they reached certain milestones of service. Having been part of the company for 49 years, Noel Jervis Pearson passed away in November 1958. Memorial articles and obituaries can only tell a small fragment of a person's life, so exactly how many good causes Noel championed and how much time he spent helping others can only be imagined by those of us outside the Pearson family. The White House is still on Town Street in Bramcote and is now Bramcote House, a care home. There's a blue plaque on the building celebrating Henry and Noel. 2 stained glass windows in St Michael and All Angels Church, Bramcote, are dedicated to Noel's parents, and at the same location there's an inscription remembering one of their sons, Corporal John Strachan Pearson of the New Zealand Machine Gun Corps. Mona Street in Beeston, site of the company's initial registered address, is still there. The site of the Foundry is now occupied by Murden Way, Clarkson Drive, Hartley Drive, Gale Close and Eaton Close in Beeston. Broadgate Recreation Ground, which sits between High Road, Humber Road, Middle Street and Regent Street, was gifted to the town by Noel's uncle, Lewis Pearson. His generosity is remembered in a blue plaque at the site. In 1914, Henry's body, buried in Egypt, was disinterred and moved to Attenborough churchyard, where he remains to this day. The Beeston Boys Brigade building, erected during Hettley's overseeing of the chapter, was demolished as part of the development of the Tesco site in Beeston. The Anglo-Scotian Mills on Wollerton Road, where the chapter began, retains its 1892 exterior, but inside is luxury apartments. Foster Avenue, which connects Roundhill School, Beeston Library and the Church of the Assumption with Beeston Square, is named after Robert Foster, who formed Foster and Pearson with John Pearson way back in 1841. Modern Beeston's population is a mixture of locals and Nottingham University students. Towns change more slowly than cities, and there are glimpses of the Pearsons' legacy still visible in Beeston and in Chilwell, Attenborough and Bramcote, though often hidden in plain sight. In researching the episode, we've discovered some excellent resources online. At fosterandpearson.co.uk, you'll find that the old company was re-established in 2009. The website does a great job of highlighting the company heritage and features excellent resources for armchair history hunters. The most detailed website was the excellent and exhaustive beeston-knots.co.uk. We'll post links in the show notes in case you want to do your own research and keep the memory alive of Noel, Henry and the rest of the Pearson family.